Welcome back to the Foreclosure Podcast. My name is Brian Treat, and every week on this podcast, we talk about foreclosures, real estate, the economy, and the impending wave of foreclosures that is on the horizon. If you're out there and in financial crisis and looking for help, looking for input, please feel free to go check out theforeclosurepodcast.com. There's a contact us page there. So if you need help finding a realtor or finding an attorney, those are needs we can very easily meet in Texas. But even if you're outside of Texas, we can probably help you find someone who is working in this field in your area, who can help you. If you're starting down that road and you're worried that you're about to get some nasty, you know, info in the mail or a notice on your door, we can definitely point you in the right direction. Thanks for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe this content. Again, theforeclosurepodcast.com. And if you can subscribe as well, that'd be great. We're on every single platform and we're even on YouTube. So please sign up wherever you are. This week, Jason Billick, who's an attorney here in Texas, is joining us again. He's been on 4 or 5 times in the past. And earlier this year, we talked about the Trump administration and all of the new policies or lack of policies that have been enacted since January of this year, and sort of this trend toward policies that don't really seem to be very consumer friendly. But we're going to sort of talk about the CFPB and the state of the world right now for consumers. So, Jason, thanks for being on again.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me. This is I always have a fun time doing this.
So, I mean, we alluded to this on the last episode when you were on a few months ago. The CFPB, I know, originally was born out of the financial crisis, the housing crisis in 2008 under Barack Obama, and it has sort of evolved over time. But just tell us a little bit about the history of the CFPB and then its current state.
Yeah, so if we were to ask people when the market crashed in '08, whose fault was it? I'm sure we can get some pretty compelling arguments from all sides of the aisle. I think it's everybody's fault. I think there's blame, equal blame to be passed around. But one of the things that I think came to light was that banks were kind of just running wild. There weren't that many checks and balances on how lending was occurring, how these loans were getting classified. And so, in light of the '08 crisis, we have Americans being left with all these questions about, the operations of the country's financial institutions. And so, a year later, I want to say 2009, President Obama proposes the creation of a new federal agency, which was aimed at protecting consumers from dubious financial products. So I'll just stop right there. Great idea, right? Just hearing that alone sounds like this is fantastic. Yes, we need more transparency.
Conceptually, that sounds good, right?
Yeah. Um, and so there were already several agencies that were kind of regulating consumer banking. And so there was like, I guess Obama and lawmakers were feeling there was kind of this gap. And so this new agency was originally designed to consolidate all the regulatory responsibilities into one place. Obviously, banks opposed it. Republicans opposed it. I say Republicans, that's not fair. Some Republicans opposed it. But the creation was included in the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, which was signed by Congress and signed by, I'm sorry, passed by Congress and signed by Obama back in 2010. So the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, was originally created by that act of Congress back in 2010. So it's been around since then. I say been around. One could argue that the CFPB has ceased to exist as of what, February of this year. Essentially, the new CFPB chief basically closed the headquarters after Trump got in office and basically said, no one show up to work. We're not doing anything on CFPB anymore. And basically saying they're going to shut the whole thing down. It has not officially been shut down yet, but for all intents and purposes, it is effectively shut down.
I mean, as this bureau has, has existed over the last 15 years. I mean, it's gotten, a fair amount of media coverage, a lot of media coverage, and again, perhaps more than other items in the news. There is very clearly, at least in my mind, the perception that consumer protection is not the business of the government, and the fact that it now fails to exist or has now been stripped down is, Republicans blame the Democrats and Democrats blame the Republicans. I fail to see why anyone would be opposed to consumer protections, but that's just my bias.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could argue why are we even talking about it since it's likely, if you look at what's happening in the political landscape, it looks like it's going away. I don't think it's going to go away. We're going to have another Democratic president eventually. It's cyclical. Then we'll have another Republican president. And I
Right.
think what's going to happen is when the Trump presidency ends, um, we're going to have a push by the next Democratic lawmaker to basically make sure this thing goes back doing what it was originally set on doing. People would not realize it, but there's been a lot of parties that have been trying to undo the CFPB through the court system. And there was a challenge brought up to the Supreme Court, I want to say as recently as last year. Um, and in May of last year, the Supreme Court came out in a 7-2 vote, basically rejecting a challenge of the constitutionality of the structure that was used to fund the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So the challenge wasn't on the constitutionality of the agency itself, but more on the funding, because that's kind of where a lot of the opponents of the CFPB originally started, is that funds are being used in a not in the traditional way that agencies are typically
Right.
funded. And so anyway, that challenge failed. And so right now you have the funding being constitutional, but the I guess the underlying question of whether or not the agency exceeds its authority, I guess, is a different question altogether. So I don't think, the CFPB is essentially done, but I just don't see it permanently going away. I think it's going to come back, just given how popular it was in the realm of consumer protection. But again, that I'm not saying this is going to happen for sure. This is just my opinion on it. And of course, I hope it comes back because I
Right.
represent consumers, and I think the CFPB does some great things.
So, I mean, a large part of its genesis from 2008, 8, 9, 10, it was when all the subprime lenders were out there. And, incredibly now, I see that we have subprime loans coming back at least a little bit. I mean, they're not, they're nowhere near as dominant as they were 15, 16 years ago, but they're back again.
Yep. Yeah. And so history repeats itself, right? We're gonna see the bad actors come back and keep doing bad things. And I guess kind of remind people, so what does the CFPB actually do? And that might be worth talking about because the average American doesn't really pay attention to what our government agencies do on a daily basis or kind of what their core mission is. And put simply, I would say the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, is designed to ensure that financial products, talking loans particularly, and financial services offered to American consumers are fair and transparent. Um, Worthwhile endeavor, right? So it's going to implement the CFPB when it was in force. It implements U.S. consumer finance laws. It'll issue new rules for lenders and other financial institutions. There was even one that was announced, I want to say a year ago, where it basically said it was going to wipe out all medical debt from credit reports, which is great for a whole host of reasons.
Sure.
And then there's an enforcement mechanism behind the CFPB that allows um, not the companies, but allows the agency to go after companies that it suspects of dishonest or illegal activity. Payday
Right.
lending is a big one. Um,
The
and
the 300% APR, right, right.
yeah, yeah, right, right. I mean, but for the CFPB, there'd be very little that consumers would be able to do. Now, I guess one could argue that consumers are left with common law causes of action. But the law provided statutory remedies and statutory claims that you can bring against bad actors in the financial sector. One of my favorite things personally was that the CFPB guidelines under RESPA, right, this Real Estate Settlement Procedures
Hmm.
Act, had the ability for homeowners to kind of pre-investigate loans that might have gone awry. So we've talked a little bit about this, but remember when a homeowner comes to me, someone when I get a potential client like Jason, I'm facing foreclosure, I don't know what to do. I always lump them in one of two categories. There's the folks that maybe the banks didn't do anything wrong, maybe the loan is legit, the servicing was legit, and there isn't really anything that would show a bad act by the bank, but you're dealing with just someone who's suffered an economic hardship, and so you're trying to help them get out of that hardship or basically manage the situation that they're in. Versus other types of claims where maybe the bank did do something wrong or the lender did do something wrong. And then sometimes you don't know, right? Sometimes
Right.
you have someone who says, I don't have my documents, I know I'm behind, and something doesn't smell right. So the CFPB guidelines and rules allowed you to kind of pre-investigate, send out requests out to the bank to get copies of all the loan docs and the correspondence. So it was almost like a pre-discovery tool, which was great. But anyway, so the CFPB did a lot of things, but that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, I'm blown away by the number of folks who would be opposed to that. I mean, unless you're, connected to those financial institutions and have a financial interest in, in having clients who don't know what their rights are, what the rules are. Why, how and why would you be opposed to being fully transparent? I mean, you want people to know the fine print. And so consumer protection is obviously a very, very good thing. And I mean, and outside of Obamacare, in my mind, CFPB was one of Obama's. It's lauded as one of his biggest victories, really.
Yeah, big time. You asked. I guess one of the things we try to do on these podcasts is we try to put our different hats on, right? And so you asked the question, why would you want to be opposed to this? Um, that's difficult for someone like me to answer because, as a consumer rights advocate, obviously everything that the CFPB does makes sense. But when you listen to the criticisms on on the opponents, oftentimes it's kind of the same criticisms that one may bring against typical agencies, and that is governmental agencies overstep their bounds, right? They're providing too much red tape. They don't allow these companies to freely negotiate and freely provide their financial services, and that it's so embroiled into bureaucracy, can't talk, that it does more harm than good. I don't know if there's, how valid
Right.
those arguments are. Um, I'm sure if we sat here and tried to think about all the times an agency overstepped its bounds, I'm sure there are dozens and dozens of examples that would prove that point. But my response to that is, well, if you do have an agency that's kind of overstepping its bounds, let's rein it in a little bit, right? There needs to be checks and balances, but getting rid of it completely doesn't help because of all the good that it's been doing in the past. I mean, I think
Right.
I was just reading a quote recently. Mike Mulvaney, back in 2018, he was in charge of the Office of Management and Budget. He was a director at the time, and he basically says that we would fulfill the bureau's statutory responsibilities, but we're not doing anything else. We're basically, for all intents and purposes, shutting down this organization. Um, so yeah, it's gotten a lot of criticism, and right now the current administration is doing everything it can to make sure that Dodd-Frank is completely
Right.
removed.
Completely obliterated. Right. Yeah. I mean, we're all guilty of clicking on terms and conditions and not reading things. But again, being a bit of a lefty progressive type as well. I mean, giving people weapons and and explaining people their rights and making it clear to the folks that they have some recourse when they get into a bind. Again, I fail to see, there's something wrong with you if you're opposed to that in my mind. I don't understand why you'd want average folks to be taken advantage of again and again. But history has proven to us that that's what tends to happen.
Yep, it sure has. So I guess we don't really know what the future holds. I don't see any change occurring anytime soon. But I guess the question then becomes, well, what's next for the CFPB? Um, when I want to say there was keep wanting to call it Twitter, but I know it's now X. But the new CFPB chief, the one who's basically telling all of his staff not to come home, he tweeted on X earlier in the year that basically said something along the effects that the agency would not be taking its next draw of the unappropriated funding because it is not reasonably necessary to carry out its duties. And this is kind of when he was telling the staff to stay home. So I guess now the CFPB can use the money that it has in its reserve fund, and it can continue to pay salaries and operating expenses. Now I say continue to pay. We're in a government shutdown at the moment, so I guess
Right.
maybe it's not paying anything right now. But the most recent Republican staff of the U.S. Senate Committee on Banking and Housing and Urban Affairs recently posted on Twitter that, quote, accountability at the CFPB is long overdue, and went on to talk about how its new chief is going to bring responsibility back to it and refocus its mission to serve the American people. Well, it doesn't serve the American people if the whole thing's shut down. Um, when you think about senators who've kind of helped launch the CFPB, the first person that comes to mind is Senator Elizabeth Warren, who's been an avid supporter of the organization. Um, she basically said that the administration can't shut down the work that it's doing. And that may be another fight for the
For a
courts
legal
later
fight,
on
right?
down the road. But yeah, as of right now, they're not doing much of anything in the realm of helping consumer advocacy. And what's fascinating is as I sit here talking to you, I got my browser up and I'm looking right now at the CFPB website, and it blows my mind how much information has been wiped
Hmm.
from the website.
Yeah, I
When I
noticed
say
that too.
information, yeah, I'm talking about like easy stuff, man. Like stuff to like, hey, if you think you're facing acts of predatory lending or you're facing foreclosure,
Right. Here are your
here's some
rights.
information. Yeah, here, well, not only your rights, but here's some information to help you and things to go. And it's just, what was great about the agency was that, lending is complicated and a lot of people don't read the fine print of their loans. And I'm not trying to give them excuses, but, people need to be that there needs to be information out there to help navigate them through the process. And
Sure.
unfortunately, they can't rely on this as a source anymore.
So the CFPB staff now, I mean, folks have been laid off or they've been moved into other areas. So what has happened to the folks there that were doing this work? Or do
I
we
think
know?
some I think some have been laid off, and I think some are getting paid. I don't know so when the
Getting paid
chief
to
said,
just stay home?
yeah, I guess get paid to stay
Huh.
home and waiting for the agency to kind of just close its doors. And
Hmm.
then I'm not sure how the shutdown right now has affected that either. I have a feeling a lot of people have already been laid off, but at this point I'm just speculating relating to yeah, it's not clear. But what we do know is that they're not operating.
Right.
So,
So, I mean, are there state resources that that seek to replicate this at all? And I presume more blue states than red states. But is that are there places folks can go if they're in California, New York, states that are going to be more consumer friendly?
uh, Texas, not so much. I mean,
Right. Of course
there,
not
I
Texas.
mean, you you got the consumer protection offices at the AG's office. One of um, my favorite. I'm going to say so. The short answer is no. There's not many local government agencies that are helping, but there are some great nonprofits, and one that has a great resource. I'm going to try to pull up the website for you right now. Um, it's basically the NCLC and the NACA. So this is the National Consumer Law Center. Uh, these guys have a lot of great resources when it comes to consumer protection. And the National Association of Consumer Advocates, which is the other, these are basically one group is based on attorneys. And these are folks that have been trying to fight consumer justice since, the 90s. And there's some great resources with both. um, NACA and with the NCLC. And I might have talked about these organizations before, but that's kind of a good place to start. If you're
Okay.
kind of just you're in the World Wide Web, you're like, man, where do I go? If you can't get to the CFPB based on what we just talked about, then these two nonprofits are a great way to start.
I'll be sure to add those to the show notes on this one. And then I mean, I do keep seeing sort of anecdotal evidence that foreclosures are ticking up. I mean, folks are getting further and further in arrears. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yes and no. I will tell you, there was a moment many months ago. I said, "Oh, we're heading to another crash. We're into another crash." But ever since people said, "Oh, we made a soft landing," it's been kind of a weird market. Real estate, it's definitely a buyer's market right now. I am seeing, I get people in all the time who are facing foreclosure, but it's not as crazy as it was years ago. So,
Hmm.
after the '08 financial crisis, there was a period from, I want to say, starting around like 2010, 2011 all the way to 2014, 15, and 16, where we were just swamped. People fighting with banks, the home mortgage, the home loan modification process went spiraling out of control. But I haven't seen that recently. I'd be curious to see where the other lawyers that you talk to, whether their practices have seen an uptick or not. But it's been pretty consistent. I haven't seen a big
Okay.
increase or a dip either way.
Yeah, I should have pulled up the stats. I saw, I believe, in Bear County that there is like a 50% increase year over year from this period in 25 to the same period in 24. So at least locally in San Antonio, it appears to be heading in the wrong direction. And so we'll see what happens next.
Yes, sir. And I think NACA or one of the organizations just got done doing one of their annual conferences, and they just got done talking about disaster recovery. And there's a lot of, I guess, if you were to ask me, what issues are you seeing more than anything? Uh, FEMA and all these natural disaster agencies that are responsible for addressing national disasters, their funding has also been stripped.
Hmm.
And so we're going to be seeing this new type of default, I think, where, a hurricane strikes, a blizzard comes in, or people suffer a natural disaster and now they don't have the wherewithal to pay their mortgage. And so where do they get that disaster recovery? Where does that assistance come from? So I think we're going to see some really new types of cases that we haven't seen as much back in the day. That's just one example um, that I see coming down the pipeline.
Hmm. Yeah.
Maybe
Well,
something to talk about on our next episode.
but we'll have you on again. Thanks for coming back on. We'll definitely put those links in the show notes, and I'll put add your contact info in there as well. If you're looking for an attorney, Jason's technically no longer living in Texas, but is still licensed here and licensed in other states too.
Right now, our law firm operates out of Texas and Minnesota. So I kind of split my time between
You
both.
did too. Okay.
We do have some lawyers that are licensed in New Mexico. So we might be able to assist people that have questions out there as well.
All right. That sounds great. Thanks for being on again. I appreciate it. And if you're listening to this podcast or watching us on YouTube, please check out theforeclosurepodcast.com. Drop us a line. We could definitely help out from a real estate perspective or a legal perspective, pretty much anywhere you are. We can try to help you find some resources in your area. And thanks for listening, and we're going to be back again soon.
See you next time.